So starting here, you'll notice that there is a carbon fiber hood. It is not an applique. It's a real carbon fiber hood that we developed for the vehicle. It's carbon. And Dave's going to help. But these are arrow catches if you haven't seen them before, rather than running hood pins. So if you get rid of the latch here, you have a two-step process there and there, and it pulls the pin out of the post. And again, it's carbon. So what I want to do now is, Aaron, do you want to, it's two Aarons, there's the other, but yeah, you can grab that post. Go ahead. I want Aaron to feel this. We're gonna just let him lift it, just to feel the difference. Go ahead. Lift that one up. So you can put it back. That's good. And then give this guy a lift. Oh, so that's 6 pounds. All right. You guys can check it out. If you guys want to compare, please feel free.
What's the weight difference?
40 pounds or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
You said 6 pound difference?
This is 6 pounds. This
Oh,
is
that's
40
6
pound
This
difference.
is yeah.
About.
Here.
This one's heavy. I know, because I own one.
You got it.
Oh, wow. That is huge.
I want to mention that when you're reducing weight from the nose of a vehicle, especially on what we call an FF platform, which is front engine, front wheel drive, that's what FF is, it's really, really good because that's the place where the vehicle is saddled with the majority of its weight. So when you're reducing weight from the front end of an FF platform, it generally helps the vehicle in terms of handling as well as acceleration and braking because you're reducing the weight. Okay, so inside you see the same oil filler cap, same radiator cap that you saw there, but you'll also notice a very small battery. So it's a custom battery tie down and a small battery over here. And then you see the cold air intake. The stock Sienna was actually getting some pretty good cool air. Andy's team had gotten it so it's not pulling a lot of swarming hot engine air. And as we know, air that's cooler is more dense in oxygen, and oxygen helps an engine make power. So we tried to optimize it a bit, both in terms of freeing up some of the restriction that was in here with 3-inch diameter aluminum tubing, as well as trying to pull it from a different location. And it has a separate apparatus on the bottom, which we're going to actually show you a little bit later, so you can see the other way that we optimized that.
Where does it draw from?
It's in the fender, down in the corner here, down in here.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Which is really great for grabbing the air that we want, but also when it rains, we have to change it to a short ram because you can suck up water and you wouldn't want to do that.
Is there a reason why you could route it through the front, or is it just radiators right there and get under?
It's packaging. Part of it's packaging. Where you've got frame rails, you've got you've got radiator, you've got a condenser for the air conditioning. This is generally a place where there's some room behind here. It still gets it where we want it. So the trick is you can put a cold air intake and you can put exhaust, you can put things on a car, but it's optimizing the lengths, the diameters, what's happening on the bottom, your location, to try to create the best version of the cold air intake. Alex, if you want to just take your hand, it's very deceptive. Just kind of crawl your fingers in until the rubber ends. Keep going. See how much tire's under there. It's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a 275 coilovers in the front in terms of the strut. They're double adjustable, which basically means you can control the stroke. So when a car goes over a bump, it's going into bump, which we call bump travel, and when it's releasing, it's called rebound. So there's a 4mm custom spacer on the front. That wasn't needed in the front for clearance, but was needed in the back. And the reason why we also put it in the front is because if you widen out the back and you don't widen out the front, then the rear sticks more than the front does. And if you're trying to get it to rotate and keep it neutral a bit, we kept it square. So that gives you an idea there. Now the brakes are similar, but the pad on here is actually an XP12, is what it's called. And that compound is good for nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So it can withstand a whole lot. And it's important to have more pad on a vehicle that has a wider tire and a stickier tire, because that is injecting heat into the system as the vehicle is stopping shorter. So we wanted a more aggressive pad to withstand that. So we have the same kind of fluid in the system, the RBF 600. And then what we've also done is we've installed a TRD stainless steel brake line kit on it. So that improves the pedal feel a bit, and it's also a bit armored. And it looks cool. So I think that covers this corner.
Camber also.
Oh yeah, so camber. So camber on this vehicle, when we get on the other side, I'm going to show you, but there are camber and caster plates that we adapted from an Australian silica plate that had the same PCD, and PCD is basically that bolt pattern, what the spacing of that pattern is. So when we found something that worked, we adapted all the rest and just kind of helped fit it. So this car is a combination of things off the shelf, things that worked as is, things that we could find that we modified, and then things created from scratch. And it's kind of a merge together of all of those possibilities. But what the plates have allowed us to accomplish in terms of what this alignment is now is you have over 3 degrees of camber, negative camber on the left side, and you have about 2 degrees on the right. Now, we can probably get in 4 to 5 degrees. You don't need that much. And then we can also push the struts farther back, and that's called caster. Caster helps with straight line stability, and what it also does is it increases the camber on the outside tire when you turn the wheel. So it gives it to you when you need it the most. And for those that don't know, the purpose of doing all this alignment is that when the vehicle goes into a corner, something happens with the control arm and the suspension as it moves upward, and that tire position changes. And what you want generally to have the most amount of grip is when that change happens, you have the tire straight across the track or the asphalt. So what we're doing is we're starting here so that when it goes to here, you have all the tire on the ground. That's the basic premise. All right. Toe change here is more than twice as much as this vehicle. Although that's not necessarily something that you'd want to drive on the street every day, it definitely really helps it turn in. And in a platform like this, it's important that first part of the turn because it dictates the rest of the path of the vehicle all the way through the corner. It's a stock Sienna, again with the N-Tune system and the stereo and the air conditioning and the dashboard and the speakers and the glove boxes. Like primarily, it actually adds weight to the car, right? We had to install it, and it weighs something. This tubing weighs something. It's made out of something called DOM. You'll notice you've got the short hood, and you've got the B-pillar here, but the distance between the seat and the steering wheel was such that normally you'd want to put your main hoop, which is this big arcing deal, at your B-pillar. This is where you'd normally put it. Problem is we needed the seat to go back much farther to allow for the travel to accommodate a variety of people. So then when we moved the main hoop back, that created a new problem because you can see there's this pocket where the hinge assembly for the door goes into. So we couldn't run the bar all the way up where you'd normally run it. So the minivan itself and the Sienna was sort of a compromise in terms of making this work, but it does work and it works well. The other thing is, usually when you're putting in an aftermarket seat, a lot of times guys get it a little lower so that they've got the center of gravity there and it's more sporty and stuff. You're not like, it doesn't feel like you're sitting on a big pincushion or a big cloud or something. But the dash is very high. And so we had to build these custom platforms. You can see they're gusseted here to lift it up another 4.5 inches, somewhere around there. That kind of covers what you see there. Everything.
Is it about where the stock seat would be?
Yes, very similar. Very similar in terms of height. It's very close. But even when Andy is sitting in here, there's a lot of headroom with a helmet on. So it really can accommodate a wide range of people. And you can see there's holes here in the brackets, so you can actually control a little bit of the rake if you wanted to, but it's a manual operation once you get it set. It's on rails, so it's just similar to a manual pull. You know, it's down on the bottom between your legs, and up and back it goes. So that's the deal with that. Everything else, obviously, you can see is largely removed, and although that was good for the weight reduction, it was really bad for the weight distribution. So we took way more out at the back than we took out at the front, so we actually hurt the weight distribution of the car, but it still was a worthwhile trade-off to accomplish what we wanted to do. Okay, so the back, let's take a look. One of the things also that I might mention with the back tire and wheel selection is there are very few vehicles in the world that you have to worry about the rear door contacting your wheel and tire. But this is one of them. So it slides over the body section in the rear. Really convenient, but could present some problems if you don't have the right selection. This is the same size tire. It's 275 40/18. But you'll notice that it's a little bit concave here. So it's kind of pinching it a bit. It's not bad, but it's taking away a little bit of the tire from the ground. That's because this is an 18x9, so it's a 1-inch narrower wheel. And the primary reason why that happened is because of packaging. A lot of the things that Andy has to contend with are packaging related. Shock absorber is extremely far outboard. The spring is inboard. They're separated. And if you were to go to a 10-inch wheel and just run that in the back, you wouldn't have any clearance. And we wanted to maintain it still within the body work. So we don't want this sticking out. That can cause different problems too, and also it looks kind of funny. So in the back, the pad is a slightly less aggressive version. It's XP12 in the front, XP10 in the back, which in a front-wheel drive vehicle that's this nose heavy, the lion's share of the work is being done by the front. And the other thing is, it starts to get the arms and the suspension components into weird angles, so that what happens when you go into a corner is that it doesn't have as much grip. So it's really, you're dealing again with production cars. You're not made to do these things, so you have to be careful with how much you're making these sorts of changes. But we're gonna, again, we'll show you what that sort of looks like in just a minute. Okay. So one of the interesting things is about the double adjustable shocks. As dynos, you usually have two different places where you make the adjustment. What's unique about this setup is that the knob acts as a double adjuster. So under the car, you're not lifting a hood on one and going at the shock tower for the other. So that's a unique design. It's number one, you can lower a car. But number two, and we're going to show you our scales over there, you can corner balance a car, which means you can control how much weight of the total mass is on what corner. So that's two major reasons why you'd go to a coilover setup. Otherwise, it's just expensive. All right, good. Close this up. A couple quick things before the guys do the little pit stop here is we did a roof rail delete, so the rails are gone. And that antenna is just for the driver radio system, but I need to mention the exhaust. So you'll see it's kind of sort of a brushed single tip. It's more raw than the other one in terms of the finishing, and we did that on purpose. But this system uses 3 inches of diameter of piping rather than the 2.5 for the other one. And it goes longer, like farther up under the car, meaning we preserve all the primary catalytic converters, but that last one, there's a little test pipe that we put in instead of that. And it has a much smaller, lighter, even less restrictive muffler. So since Ben is going to ask, we got out of our intake and exhaust were approximately 40 horsepower. Okay? So again, you're talking about a vehicle that starts at 266. So you can do the math from there. It's not precise because we haven't engine dynoed anything. But at the wheels, it's the other thing I can tell you is we talk about area under the curve. And what area under the curve is it basically isn't about the peak number, which is this dyno queen bragging rights number, but the usable area that you would use not just on the track but on the street. And we saw gains everywhere from about 2,500 RPM all the way through. So that separation from stock and that power is not just that peak, but there's big fat sections of gain all the way through the power. So we're gonna you guys kind of want to peer in here. We're gonna go over a few things that we talked about and some things that you couldn't see. Perhaps the first thing that you could do, Dave, can we put this down? Ben, you were asking about the alignment. You guys want to look inside of here. You can see the camber plate in this pocket. If you guys want to just come look, just take the light and just take a look inside of there. You'll notice that there's a lot of things that'll move, so we can move this whole thing in and back and set the alignment. And then the guys have all that marking on it so that they can make sure it doesn't move and that our alignment doesn't shift on us. But again, that's that adapted Australian silica plate we've got in there. So the great thing about cars is because they cost so much to develop, sometimes things have some interchangeability, even if you have to modify them a little bit. So, all right. Down at the bottom here, again, you've got the stock rotor, stock caliper, the different pad, but the same size. And we'll show another empty version of the pad. And this is from yesterday. It's pretty muddy and dirty. But it's very big. It's like as big as a Corvette pad. So you know, when you talk about the swept area, so that's that surface area, the pad and the rotor size is just one thing, but the pad size is also really important. You know, manufacturers, we don't always talk about how big is the pad. Now, sometimes we express it in swept area, and that takes the pad into account. But if you had a big rotor with a tiny pad, you wouldn't have much swept area. This pad's very big. About having the spring and the shock separate here. So you'll see where the shock position is. And I'll point out that there's a zip tie on the shock. This is a crude way to see how that goes. So this shock here is a full aluminum bodied shock, which means it's way lighter. The post that it mounts to is a little bit different design because the bearing size was different than what there was stock, and it was easier for us to do that than to figure out custom bearing assemblies. But it's still in the same place. So it's a little hard to see, but there's that little bitty spring down in there that had to occupy an area that normally had a spring about this big in diameter. So what we had to do is adapt it. So there's a cone. If you guys get in here and you put your hand up in here, that helps locate the spring in the top. And then at the bottom, there's the same threaded perch that you can actually adjust the ride height, even though it's not a coilover setup over here, as you guys can see. So the reason why we didn't go to a different spring that would just fit easily in that actual location is because, again, we wanted more choices. And we could pull these off of the shelf, lots of them at different rates at the same length, and try it and see what was going to work. The pink that you see there is something that we put on there that allows us to see what's called a witness mark. And a witness mark is like what it sounds like. It bears witness to the fact that something rubbed against something else, and it's probably not good. So like a lot of times with the rubber and everything that's in the car, like the whole subframe can move or the arms can move when you have it all loaded up and you're adding that much more grip. And so we did see a couple of things happen, and then we addressed them. And then since then, that pink hasn't changed at all. So it was very important for us to not build a vehicle that made a lot of weird clunks and things were rubbing on other things. And it's not some tuner special. It's a car that's designed to drive very well. It's a lot stiffer and it's a lot different. But again, we're amplifying the best of what Andy has made Sienna into. You can also see the 3-inch piping here, as well as the muffler. The little can over there. And it's a pretty big exhaust. Like if you look at that tubing, this is generally the size of tubing that sometimes you see on forced induction cars. But we found that there's almost no disadvantage to doing it, and it allows it to still exhale a little bit better, theoretically.